All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. Another episode of Catching Up with Jacob. And now, our last one for October. Time's going by really fast. Jacob, what do you think? Time's going by really fast. How you doing today?
This has been a very rapid and tumultuous year. Um, Obviously, the war in the Ukraine, obviously, events domestic, obviously, the impending midterm elections. All of these things are culminating at the same time, and I'm firmly convinced they all have prophetic ramifications. So let's go.
All right. Jacob, you wanted to talk about Jerry Lee Lewis. Something happened. Fill us in.
Jerry Lee Lewis, what can we say about a man who grew up as a not just as a biological cousin, but as a virtual stepbrother in the same house with Jimmy Swaggart, an evangelist who became discredited, and Jerry Lee Lewis, who always knew the gospel his whole life, and who began playing the same kind of music as Jimmy Swaggart did. They began by playing gospel music and gospel piano, and that was his background. And he exemplifies the relationship between early rock and roll and, of course, the gospel tradition. Like the black blues musicians of the Delta in Mississippi, south of Memphis, Jerry Lee Lewis embodies a contradiction between what became the rock music of the 1950s and what it engendered in the 1960s and 70s, and a conservative Christian tradition. Quite a situation. I don't know what to make of it. I know the man knew the gospel. I just hope at some point that he put his faith in what he knew to be true and in who he knew to be true. Because if he didn't, he's not going to be able to plead ignorance. That man absolutely knew the gospel. Now, he's not the only one. I would say the same thing is largely true, certainly about Elvis Presley. We know from his half brother, who is a Christian. We know about many of these early people in soul music, like Aretha Franklin, whose father was a preacher. We know about this from many, many sources. They all came from the Bible Belt, black and white, soul and rock, blues. They all had a gospel basis and a knowledge of the gospel, but none more than Jerry Lee Lewis. What can we say? Jerry Lee Lewis helped fund his cousin Jimmy Swaggart's ministry. He took money that he made in the rock music industry in the early days, and he paid travel expenses and ministry costs and things to launch or subsidize the launching of his cousin's evangelistic ministry. That's quite a thing. It's quite a world to be trapped in. What can we say? Well, we can't say anything, but one thing is for sure. He either returned to the faith of his childhood and what he knew, or he's going to spend eternity wishing he didn't. Great balls of fire can have more than one meaning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for that. And we do want to welcome those who are watching on different platforms. We're Rumble, RTN, Vimeo, of course, Facebook, of course, YouTube. And I'm missing one. Vimeo, did I mention Vimeo already? Telegram. So a lot of platforms, a lot of eyes today, Jacob. So we welcome those who are watching and those who will watch later for this episode. And we're coming down to the end of the year. And as Jacob says, it's been a tumultuous year, so we'll be catching up on a lot of things. Jacob, let's get right off the bat here. No doubt, one organization that seems to have its tentacles pretty much everywhere and anywhere is the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab, of course, is the mastermind, the brains behind it. Perhaps not in a good way, but now he's getting into weaponizing banking. His own words is that he wants to create an economic weaponry, uses of effectiveness and sanctions, his own words, This was said at the World Economic Forum meeting just in May. Yeah, so where 50 heads of government met, and this is part of their conversation: global sustainability, scientific collaboration, and using economic weaponry. I wonder what he means by all that, but I guess we don't have to guess. Economic weaponry is something that's coming, and it's already here. They're weaponizing banking, and PayPal and other banks have already jumped on the bandwagon with the ESG and trying to get into the climate change mentality. Jacob, what's the outlook on this when you're weaponizing banking, you're being deplatformed, and you're being debanked?
Well, first of all, let's understand that this is simply a proclamation of something that has already been put into effect to some degree. You had enemies of democracy trained by this enemy of democracy. And remember, Schwab is an enemy of democracy and an enemy of justice. He's an enemy. He's an enemy of freedom. He actually called, and you can watch him saying it on the video. He actually called, invited the dictator of China, a man guilty of the violation of human rights and suppression of freedom on every level, an autocratic dictator making himself another Mao, inviting him to be the leader of this new world economic reset. Didn't use the term reset, but that's how it was described. You're calling upon a malicious dictator, an enemy of human rights. This tells you what Schwab is. Now, as far as the weaponizing of banking, one of his disciples is Elliott Trudeau. What did Trudeau do with the trucker strike in Canada? We know a Christian lady who was arrested for bringing lemonade and cookies to protesting truck drivers, and she was arrested. To this day, these truck drivers cannot get access to financial services because of the weaponization of the Canadian banking system by Trudeau, a disciple of Schwab. But there's more. I ideologically agree with Liz Truss. Her plan was ideologically right, but the timing was wrong. I admit she had the timing wrong, and the presentation of it was not good. However, who deposed her? It was the reaction of the City of London and of the financial institutions of the City of London that brought about the crisis and the run on the pound that precipitated her removal. What you essentially have is Schwab's globalists, the
That's right.
globalists,
That's
removing her and putting in Sunak in her place, putting in a globalist in her place. What they could not achieve by stopping Brexit, they're trying to stop by globalism. They're trying to destroy populism. They're trying to circumvent democratic process by effectively a weaponization of the banking system. Now, when you look at what is happening in the United States, where the Justice Department has been politically weaponized by Obama and now by, of course, by Biden. Although Nixon initially attempted it, it was Obama who really made it a mainstream strategy and got away with it. And now, of course, Biden has taken it further. Okay, that's been done with the Justice Department. But next on the agenda, in the name of fighting inflation, having nothing to do with inflation, it's 87,000 new IRS agents, armed accountants with guns, to make war on working families. You have the weaponization of the IRS, of the financial system. What's happening in Britain, what's happening in Brussels, what's happened in Canada, what's happening in the United States, all of these things are happening for a reason. There is a spirit on back of these things, and it is the spirit of Antichrist. It is absolutely, positively creating a scenario where it'll be an easy step to a Revelation 13 outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Bravo, Jacob. You're absolutely 100% right. On a practical level, and people may not realize how detrimental this is and how precarious it might put us in a situation where, okay, they're not millionaires. Most people that may watch this are not millionaires, they're not billionaires, and they would say, well, what's the big deal? They're just going after the big fish, right? But they didn't go after the big fish in Canada. They went after here in the States. Obviously, people like Kanye West, people like Alex Jones have been debanked, deplatformed. JP Morgan deplatformed or debanked Kanye West. But what about this one? PayPal says we're going to steal $2,500 from you if you spread misinformation, which they themselves will be the determining factor of what that misinformation is. There's no telling of what that misinformation could be. Hate, intolerance. What does that mean in terms of what you say on the internet? What as an organization? Can PayPal do this? I mean, is it legal?
Like Twitter, they set themselves up as a thought police. If you disagree with us, we have the right to fine you. They set themselves up as a government outside of the government, and the government will let them do it because they're acting in league with the agenda of the establishment, of the political establishment. The government is actually using them as privatized law enforcement, where they will be the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor. People need to begin to get away from financial services that are doing that. They need to begin withdrawing from financial services that are doing that. Who are these people, financial services, to set themselves up as a judge, jury, and prosecutor concerning issues of free speech and political opinion and say, we can fine you, take your money, block you, do anything we want, and you with impunity, and you can't stop us. And our corrupt federal government will let them get away with it.
Absolutely.
How can this happen? Well, read Revelation 13. It's happening.
Yeah. It doesn't take a whole lot of thinking now and a whole lot of imagination how these prophecies in the scripture, especially Revelation, will come to pass. We already see the seeds of destructions being planted. They call it the Great Reset. It's going to be the big steal, and it's going to be the big lockdown in a sense of you're going to be locked out of society. You're going to be basically, if you're not part of their agenda, you're going to be ostracized from society. And it is happening. And so a lot of ministries, Jacob, a lot of people, a lot of individuals, a lot of small businesses depend on PayPal or platforms like that for their everyday business. It's very convenient. It's simple to use. But now it's an enemy.
It is an enemy. We need to define it as an enemy and get away from it. Look what happened in China. Look what Mr. Schwab's hero did in China. People wanting to get their money from the banks because of the corrupt banking system in China, wanting to get their money, they just took their QR code on their cell phone saying that they were not COVID infected, and the government just changed it to red, saying that you're COVID infected to stop people from going to the bank without any reference to COVID. It was just a means to control people legally and financially. That's what they did with COVID. Now, don't think it can only happen in China.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And just want to remind everyone, we will be taking questions, putting Jacob on the hot seat, his favorite seat, and we're going to be putting him on at the end of this catching up, asking questions, but we're also going to go backstage. So for those who are on Rumble, and for those who are on RTN, you'll be backstage as well with us. So in Telegram, we'll be backstage in Telegram there. For those on YouTube and Facebook, stuff like that, when the end comes of the episode, we'll go backstage, jump over to Rumble, RTN, Telegram, and find us there and find out what Jacob really thinks about all this. He's holding back right now for obvious reasons, but find out when his hair is down. Your hair's getting a little long, Jacob. So we'll let the hair down after on the backstage. So it's going to hold the backstage. So questions on Rumble, and then we'll flip over to those platforms and leave the other ones because Jacob's too hot for the internet. He's too hot for those platforms, and he needs to go to its own. So more of that to come. Jacob, this is urgent. and I need your thoughts on this. 101st Airborne Battalion, or Air Force 101st Airborne Screaming Eagles out of Kentucky, are in Europe for the first time since the Battle of the Bulge, since D-Day. They've been deployed there on top of 120,000 military personnel already in Europe. They're practicing war games 3 miles from Ukraine at the Romanian border. They're not there. They said they're not there for defensive purposes. They're there for offensive purposes, even to be deployed behind enemy lines. Are we already in a scenario where this is on the verge of a war? We're at the precipice of a war. Now, I do need to predicate this on the fact that each other, NATO, Russia, Ukraine, the U.S., they're all blaming each other for a tactical nuclear dirty bomb of some sort that could be detonated within Ukraine. They're all blaming each other that they're the ones who are going to do it, and therefore they need to stop each other from doing it. You got two guys, sick and demented and evil on both sides. You got Biden and Putin with their finger on the button, and he just deployed that 101st Airborne into Romania. Jacob, what are we dealing with? What are your thoughts?
It is like anything else, like what you just said. What these people say don't matter. For instance, what kind of an idiot is going to believe that for 1 to 2,000 billionaires in the United States, between 1 and 2,000, no more than 2,000, there are fewer than 2,000, you need 87,000 new IRS agents with guns? No, they're there to go after the middle class. Obviously, that's what's happening. Well, they lie about domestic issues the way they lie about foreign policy. Most NATO countries did not want the Ukraine in NATO because of the corruption of the Ukrainian government that Hunter Biden, with the blessings of his father, was implicated with.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
What you have is a proxy war. NATO is already fighting Russia by proxy. It's just a proxy war. The Cold War was a series of proxy wars. Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, what happened in Central America with the countries. These were just proxy wars of bigger powers. Well, what you have now is a proxy war of bigger powers. There is no legal basis for any NATO country, especially the United States, to enter into the Ukraine. Supporting the Ukraine, armaments, finance, humanitarian aid, you can make those arguments. Okay. Putin's a bad man, you can make those arguments. But to actually commit NATO troops into a combat situation on Ukrainian soil, you cannot make that argument. Ukraine cannot join NATO after the war has begun. It was either a member of NATO before, and most NATO countries didn't want it, or it isn't. And the fact is, it isn't. This is completely wrong. It is a foreign policy out of control and a defense policy out of control. First of all, you have incompetent weaklings like Miley and Austin, people who are jokes. The only thing in the favor of the West and of the United States particularly is that the Russian generals have largely proved to be jokes as well, except the present commander, who's responsible for the genocide of tens of thousands of people, many of them Christians, in Syria. Okay. As you correctly point out, you have two corruptocrats, one in the White House and one in the Kremlin, both corrupt, both mentally unstable, one senile and one desperate and becoming increasingly paranoid. It is the most dangerous situation of its type since the Cuban Missile Crisis, undoubtedly. With this, I do agree with Mr. Putin. Again, if Donald Trump had been president, Putin would not have invaded the Ukraine.
You're right. Absolutely.
That's what people, if he had been president, Afghanistan would not have fallen to the Taliban. Yet the mainstream media overlooks this. The lying hags of a certain women's TV program ignore this. They ignore the obvious and expect other people to ignore it. Social media ignores it. That is what is happening. You're expected to ignore the obvious. Well, what you said is obvious. You have corruptocrats with their fingers on the button, and neither one of them are mentally stable, and neither one of them are competent.
Jacob, you were very young when the Cold War was at its heyday. I mean, obviously we hit a crescendo at some point, and then it tapered down, and eventually Gorbachev and Reagan settled it out, and it was over. Supposedly, it was over. Do you remember a time like this where people were this concerned? I mean, people are genuinely. I mean, this is unbelievers who are genuinely concerned that we're on the verge of a nuclear disaster, and and some of them are getting very angry at the Democratic Party because and rightly so, and obviously some of the Republican Party as well. So it's responsible for this. But have you ever seen anything like this? We're at the precipice, and I don't know if people realize it, but some people are realizing that this is precarious.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was no anger at JFK, even though he messed up with the Bay of Pigs. He plainly had a bad policy move with the Bay of Pigs. There was no national anger towards him by most of the voting constituency of either party. Okay. But in the Vietnam War, you did have an anger by Democrats against the Johnson administration. I remember liberals and students and people who voted for Johnson protesting in front of the White House. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? These were people who were Democrats and who voted for Johnson, who hated Goldwater the way they hated would later hate Trump, and then turned against him. So the answer is, I did see it in the Vietnam era, but not in the Cuban era.
I believe this is a dangerous game. If the U.S. is playing games with Russia and saying we're going to provoke this, and they're the largest supporter of military weapons into Ukraine, and the 101st Airborne fighting Screaming Eagles are there. I don't like the game of chicken. And if you're trying to say, if not you, but if we're trying to say that we're going to win this game of chicken, I'm very concerned. Do you believe some of the New York Post articles about Putin being very sick, finding some imprints on back of his hand regarding cancer treatment that he's getting? Are these believable? What are your thoughts on that? Because that would mean a very desperate man that's very sick.
It is possible, and there are definitely forensic medical experts who will look at film footage and try to determine some medical pathology from the way they look on video filmed images. That is true. The problem is, in a war like this, and particularly in the cyber age, you have psychological warfare and military disinformation. So you don't know if what you're reading may be something leaked or deliberately leaked by the Pentagon or the CIA to the media, because that's what they want the media to report. For various reasons, for Putin to see it, for the Europeans to see it, for the public to see it. It is impossible to tell if it is leaked, if it is deliberately fabricated information or not. It's impossible. It's just part of psychological warfare, and it's part of media warfare, and it's part of cyber warfare. To specifically answer your question, you cannot know for sure. What you can know for sure is you cannot believe the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN or the BBC or MSNBC. You know, you cannot believe those people. But
very clear.
What can you believe?
Jacob, USA, Japan, Australia, the UK, and China have all recommended their citizens to leave Ukraine immediately. USA, Canada, and the UK also have called all their citizens to leave Russia immediately. Russia ordered evacuation of one of the breakaway regions that were claimed from Ukraine, and citizens of the military have fully evacuated that region. It seems to me, if I'm just basing it on movement, not what they say, but just the movement of people, and obviously the citizens leaving Ukraine and leaving Russia. Are maybe, are we on the verge of something that could happen? Maybe in a regional level. I'm not saying complete nuclear MAAD type level, but a tactical nuclear one within the region. It talks about the Zaporizhia nuclear reactors, the 6 of them, the 2 dams. What do you think it's going to happen? And if you had
I was just in Europe last week. I was in Germany and Holland, and I was trying to gauge what people were saying and people were thinking. My German is not brilliant, but I can understand. Yeah, I can talk to people and things like that. Actually, I talk to them in Yiddish. They answer me in German. The way the media and the government in the United States portray the situation and the way it is portrayed in Europe are 2 different approaches. Europe and America both have their respective kinds of hypocrisy. For instance, the Ukraine is much closer to Germany and to Western Europe and to Central Europe than it is to the United States. Why has most of the economic, humanitarian, and military aid once again come from the American taxpayer? Why are the Germans contributing so little? Why are they, as always, getting a free ride on the back of the American taxpayer the way they did in the Cold War? Why, when the American taxpayer spent more to defend Europe from communism than Europeans did? The ripoff of the American taxpayer. You've got to understand the media will not talk about this. Neither the European media nor the White House. They will not talk about the ripoff of America. It was the same in Yugoslavia. Why was it American troops? You'll notice it's always the Anglo-American alliance. It is always the Americans and the British who will put the lives on the line, will put up the aid, put up the money. It's always the Americans and the British. It is not the continental Europeans. They're by nature freeloaders, especially Germany. It's a nation of freeloaders. They want a free ride. Now they try to justify this. People are afraid of us because of what Hitler did, and we cannot remilitarize. Yeah, but you've got money. Where's the money? So the whole thing is a financial con. That's the first thing you have to realize. Secondly, although there is concern in Europe about a cold winter, energy-wise, it's not highlighted in the media, and it's not being talked about by the average person as much as it's being talked about in the United States. They're much less concerned about it in Germany than they are in the American media. I'm not saying they don't know about it, but it's not something you hear every day propounded repeatedly. So I look at things from a European perspective, from a British perspective, from an American perspective, and from an Israeli perspective. Moriel tries to look at things from the point of view of America, of Europe, of Britain, which is separate from Europe, and from Israel. We try to look from the perspective of each one of these things. And it tells you something, or it paints a picture very different than what you get from the mainstream media. That's to begin with, okay? Now, the evacuations. Well, yeah, there's evacuations, and it may be a matter of legitimate concern, but it also may be doing that to manipulate public opinion and scaremonger. You just cannot trust what they do or why they do it. I'm not saying there's no substance to those fears, but I'm saying you cannot take anything they do at face value. Now, concerning Russia, Russia is afraid of its army being trapped between the Ukrainian front and the Dnieper River, being trapped on the wrong side of the river with no way out. They're trying to get, or have gotten, most of the ethnic Russian population to the east side of the river. That tells you that they know they're in some kind of strategic trouble or under some kind of strategic threat. As this happens, Putin gets more and more desperate. What is going to stop him? Now, remember, this was largely achieved by Western intelligence assistance and by HIMARS. The HIMARS are basically rocket launchers on the back of a truck. They're not even the most advanced American rocket system. There are more advanced ones. Germany could easily provide 250 Leopard tanks, Leopard 2 tanks, to the Ukraine, train them in a matter of weeks how to use them, and just let it go. We have not given jets, even older, almost outmoded jets, such as F-16s, to the Ukrainians. We've not even given them hardly any advanced weaponry, apart from some of the HIMARS stuff. The rockets themselves are advanced. I'm sorry, the one exception will be the Javelin. The Javelin is the only state-of-the-art ordnance. If this is what the Ukrainians are doing with limited quantities of outdated stuff, what chance does Russia have? Now, we have to understand something. During the Cold War, the Soviet threat was amplified and amplified and amplified. Why? Because defense industries would be given contracts to counteract the Russian advancement. I recall going to Russia after the Iron Curtain collapsed. I'm telling you, 10, 12, 15 miles outside of Moscow and Leningrad, it was a half step above being third world. How can we have been afraid of these people? These are poor countries. They are nothing. You go outside of the main cities, outside of Moscow and Leningrad, St. Petersburg now, and it was nothing. It's just poor people. It was almost unbelievable. We were afraid of such people. The defense establishment makes its money by making weapons. And so they must propagate the threat in order to get defense contracts. By giving these weapons to the Ukraine, they are depleting arsenal reserves that'll have to be replenished. Always remember, it is not always a strategic game. It is not always a political game. It is an economic game. Follow the money. It is not just about military conflict. It's not just about political conflict. Follow the money.
Absolutely true. No doubt this is something I think we have to be thinking of and watching out for. I'm not saying it's immediate. I don't want anybody to think that we're calling for an immediate nuclear device that's going to go off, but it is something to think about and something to be considering, of course, for prayer, for believers to pray and minister the gospel to people, because people are afraid. They genuinely are afraid. Now, I have to tell you this, Jacob, I came almost to the end, to the brink of my faith, because I couldn't believe I was actually agreeing with the Democrats this week. 50 congressional Democrats, 50 of them wrote a letter to the White House saying to Biden and his White House that to seek peace at all costs, even if we have to sacrifice a free state of Ukraine, the concept of the free state of Ukraine. This is crazy. For the first time, I agree that we should seek peace, not ratchet up the war machine. 50 of them signed this, very different than the Republicans, who Mitch McConnell said we're going to give $50 billion more to Ukraine. After some Republicans said, if we get the House, we're going to backtrack, we're going to roll back some of this stuff. Immediately, McConnell said, no, we're not doing that, and we want it done before January, probably thinking to do it before some of the new Congress gets in. There's a call for peace from the Democrats, 50 of them. Can you believe this? I don't know. I don't know what to think. Because the first time
Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez being protested by left-wing liberals in New York. This is what happened in the Johnson administration. It was a left-wing reaction against the left.
Absolutely.
Happened during
Absolutely.
Vietnam. Now, I have said from the beginning, desperate people do desperate things. I do not consider Putin to be fully stable, and I cannot eliminate the possibility of him using a tactical nuclear weapon in his desperation. I've never said he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Jacob, you recently did a message here in California about what can be shaken will be shaken from Hebrews 12, going back to 2008, 2009, even 2012. You did it in 2012, 2013, about the economic shaking. We're going through it, and I think it's more to come. The IMF warns the worst is yet to come. Global economy and recession, a risk that is almost a certain thing. They're warning inflation squeezing not only Americans, Europeans, and other countries to a breaking point. Breaking point. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on in the stock market and some of these tittering. We're teetering on the brink of 2008, 2009, if not worse.
Because of increases in interest rates by the Fed, you're going to see, or we are seeing already, two things beginning to take shape. One, expect a 15 to 20% decline in the housing market in 2023 because interest rates are just too high for people to get mortgages. Demand is going to decrease. You're going to see a 15 to 20% decline in the value of real estate across the board. I'm not saying there will not be certain areas that will be less affected than others, but it's on average, I would expect the way it's going, and there's going to be a further rate increase by the Fed and by the Bank of England of 15 to 20%. That's the first.
I think was it the European European banks actually increased it last night.
That's correct. Secondly, you are going to see a decrease in corporate profits of American multinationals abroad, because when you take their currency and you put it back into your own, and your own is stronger than theirs, you don't have as much money as you used to. Plus, you become less competitive in certain sectors because your exports are more more expensive. A strengthened dollar has its good aspects, but it also has its weak aspects. So again, as I always say, follow the money. Ultimately, as we know, there'll be fear and anxiety among the nations, none of them knowing the way out. The reason the instability has not overtaken the United States already, and it's happening in Britain. Britain is now becoming very, very, very precarious. People are afraid. People are troubled, and becoming more so over energy prices and other things. Okay. It's perilous. It's becoming perilous on this side of the Atlantic in Great Britain. That is for sure. The only thing is Russia, China, Germany, Japan, the other major economies are also in peril, and in worse peril in many respects than the United States. So the United States is relatively well off compared to these other major economies. But compared to its own history of stability and prosperity, it is not well off.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, people have normally you just basically you see the transfer of money into the U.S. market, into the bond market, but that's already unstable. And where are you going to go? Where else
The
can
bond
you
market
go?
in Europe is shot to nothing.
Wow.
Now, understand something. Under Donald Trump, oil was about a third the price it is now. Inflation was 2%. Now it's well above 10. And there are still people stupid enough to vote Democratic. But there are also Republicans who are stupid enough to think Mitch McConnell's a conservative. People reap the fruit of their own stupidity.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
like black and Jewish America and the students of America. The Jews reaped the fruit of their own stupidity when Obama knifed Israel on the back on the UNESCO vote. Black
Yes.
Americans reaped the fruit of their own stupidity when Black American family income declined by $900 after 2 terms of Obama. The actual earning of average Black American family went down by $900 after 8 years of Obama. It went down. You know, he knifed them in the back. And then, of course, the students sniped in the back over them paying Obamacare for the uninsured
Yeah.
as the future labor force. People reap the fruit of their own stupidity. But that is not only Democrats. You had a case today where a corrupt Democrat, the husband of Pelosi, someone broke into his house. Now, these elitists don't care what happens to ordinary people or ordinary families. They're quite happy to have district attorneys and prosecutors who will release criminals without bail because they think they're protected in their gated communities. But when they're not protected in their gated communities, even on that level, they reap the fruit of their own stupidity, the way that Pelosi and her husband did today. Nobody is going to be immune. In 2008, we said everything that can be shaken will be shaken. And we specifically said that many ministries and churches built on the schemes and visions of men instead of the vision of God are going to be hit financially. But we also said there will be faithful churches and faithful ministries who remain loyal to the Lord on the basis of his word and have shown financial integrity that God is going to prosper and use. No matter how serious it becomes, the Lord is going to meet the needs of those who faithfully do his work in ministry. I'm convinced. As for the world, fasten your seatbelt.
Very true. Jacob, you mentioned the UK. As some have described it, it was utter chaos after Liz Truss had a vote of no confidence, and she stepped down 45 days into her prime ministership. And now Rishi Sunak, which we had warned about here many times ago before Bojo stepped down, that he could be possibly a candidate. And you warned about the fact that this would be really, really bad. Rishi Sunak, a devout Hindu, he is now the new prime minister. They have allowed him in India. It is really kind of interesting. The way they phrased it is a celebration of reverse colonization, according to many Hindu newspapers. Britain is now in the hands of an Indian, they said. And of course, this is suggesting, of course, there's a measure of revenge against India by Sunak's power. He's welcomed by Modi. He's welcomed by Modi in some 2030 roadmap that he talked about it with him. So welcome to central bank digital currency. Sunak is a big proponent of blockchain and CBDC. Jacob, what does that mean? Talk about the ramifications politically and financially. Then let's talk about the spiritual side, because that's the most important part.
Last Sunday at a church in Bournemouth, when I got back from Europe, I addressed the situation that you described, and I'll be talking about it on RTN, Word for the Weekend, tomorrow, on Saturday tomorrow. But in brief, you have a Hindu prime minister at number 10 Downing Street. Right after the death of Queen Elizabeth, who was the defender of the faith, meaning Christianity, at least with a small c. Now you have King Charles, who's the defender of faith. Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, he doesn't care. So now you have a pantheist in Buckingham Palace, and you have a Hindu who worships Rama, Sita, and Shiva, who the New Testament says other gods are demons, as does Moses, in number 10 Downing Street. You've got a mayor of London, a disgusting individual who is a Muslim and who actually stated that people in England have to get used to terrorism as a reality of
Unreal.
Muslim life, because that's the way, of course, it is in the Muslim world. A Muslim mayor of London, a worshiper of other gods, a Hindu prime minister, and a pantheistic king. Now, the Church of England,
What a mess.
go there. So, yes, it is spiritual, but it is God's judgment on a nation that has turned its back on its biblical and Judeo-Christian heritage. I've talked about this, and we'll be talking about it further. But understand about Sunak. It does not bother me that he's an Asian. I'd be quite happy if there was an Indian or an Asian prime minister who was a committed Christian. But this is a Hindu, a worshiper of other gods in number 10 Downing Street. And he is a Schwab slob. He is a globalist. He was pushed into power by the globalists. The financial institutions of the City of London, as I said, used the crisis that they helped generate to remove a conservative government and replace it with a globalist. He is a globalist. He is a Schwab slob on top of being a Hindu. That is the reality. But I have no doubt it is God's judgment.
Yeah. I had read that he, being a devout Hindu, he swore an oath when he became an MP on the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of their sacred books. He became
a member of parliament. He took his oath on the Bhagavad Gita. And the Mahabharata. Unbelievable. Now, it's worse than that. Here in England, and I'm not far from a very large Hindu population at a place called Hounslow, not all that far from it. They point out that he became prime minister on the Hindu feast of Diwali, the Hindu feast of lights, and they were showing him dressed as the god Rama and pictures showing that Rama was now the leader of the government and of the nation of Great Britain. So to them, it is not just payback for colonialism. To them, it is the conquest of Christianity by Hinduism. At the same time, the BJP is persecuting Christians in India.
Yeah, absolutely. A false festival of lights, knowing that Christ is the true light of the world. It's a false festival of light. So obviously the superstition that, he's Lord Rama coming in to save the day. And it is incredible. I mean, it just seems to, like you said, Jacob, it's the judgment of God. And, and
it's an indictment of the church, especially the Church of England. And it's an indictment of the Evangelical Alliance, which is another joke.
Yeah. What's the state of what are Christians saying, Jacob? I mean, I know you're saying this, but what other Christians are saying? Are they concerned about this? Is it are they having just picnics at the church and move on kind of stuff? Or is there a real concern?
In the age of Laodicea, most are saying next to nothing. Some are, most are not.
Unbelievable. It is true. Now, speaking of real quick, speaking of Europe, since we're close by there, have you heard about BASF and their problems that they're having? BASF is that German company that basically produces everything for Europe, from chemical products to pharmaceutical. They're in trouble. They produce a wide range of chemicals, solvents, and electronic grade chemicals, and all that. It's the biggest company, probably in Europe, if not the biggest, top 5. They're in trouble because of the energy crisis.
Arbor is another one. Heuke Organon is another one in Germany, but they are one of the top 5. There's also the one that's big, that's German, but it's big in the United States and makes Bayer aspirin. Anyway, it's one of the top 5. Yes.
Yeah. What they call the Verbund. Verbund is basically
that's right. Verbund. That's right.
Yeah, they have this term that it's such a complex company.
Yes,
in their facilities, it's huge, enormous. But because of the green energy and the sustainability that the government is pushing on them, this is BASF's own words. They might have to shut down, but if they shut down part of it, the whole thing is coming down. This is problematic to the
It's not only
European
that, but they make components for infrastructure and industrial operating systems, manufacturing systems
Yeah.
depend on them making replacement components.
Yeah, automotive, construction,
That's
textile. I
correct.
mean, touch
That is
everything.
correct.
Unreal. If this goes, this is a major downfall in the European
Yes.
economy. It's already
IT
precarious.
Carbon and Krupp, there's like 10 major German companies, and I would say that they're in the top 5. But there's something else happening in Germany that is even worse.
What's that?
Credit Suisse is in trouble because of the swaps, but Deutsche Bank is in trouble because of the swaps. If Deutsche Bank goes, it is going to be like Lehman Brothers in the States and like Northern Rock in Britain. It'll be something of that magnitude. Credit Suisse goes in Zurich. And if Deutsche Bank goes in Germany, you are going to have what you had with Lehman Brothers and what you had with Northern Rock in London. It's going to happen again.
Wow. Now you have infrastructure, you have chemicals, you have production of infrastructure material, and banking going down at the same time. You have a major problem in Europe.
Major problem.
On top of the energy crisis and food crisis that's already been, we're quite aware of that. Quite aware of that.
Yeah, the food crisis is already taking a bite out of people's family sustainability in Poland, in places like it's already having an impact in Poland, Czech Republic also. Families are struggling in the Czech Republic.
Unbelievable. Jacob, before we take questions, as we're getting down to the hour mark, let's talk about Israel and the Middle East. A lot of stuff happening there, and we don't want to dismiss it. Jacob, talk to me first about the Israeli elections coming up November 1st. It snuck up on me. I thought about it a couple months ago, but as you said, time is going so fast. November 1st, ex-Israeli prime minister, is he going to win? Many are calling for his victory. He came out and warned against sending weapons to Ukraine, which may be popular or unpopular, I don't know. But he certainly is in the race. What do you think? Let's talk about that first, the preview of the elections. We're going to be there soon. What do you think? And what's the temperature there in Israel?
He may be saying that's to send weapons, but I guarantee you the Mossad is up to their eyeballs in backing Zelensky. Up to their eyeballs. Netanyahu wants to negotiate with Putin because he has always negotiated with Putin concerning Syria. That's what he did. And he wants to perpetuate that policy. But what they say officially and what they will actually do, believe me, will be two different things. Israel is actively involved in cyber war. They have something called 8200 Shmoni Matayim. They're like the NSA of Israel, And they are working 24/7 on Ukraine on signal intelligence. No, you're not going to see Merkava tanks being sent or sold to the Ukraine, but you are definitely seeing intelligence cooperation.
Absolutely. Now, it's go ahead.
Something else, of course, is that with the coming embargo in February, if it goes through on all Russian oil and natural gas coming to Europe, this will press for a more rapid development of the Israeli Leviathan fields of Israel, Cyprus, and Greece for natural gas. So there's the economic interest of Israel to replace Russia to some degree, not fully, to get a piece of the pie left by Russia. Yes.
To Europe. Yeah, absolutely. Zelensky was a little critical of Israel before because they weren't supporting him as much, at least publicly. But now he's sharing information, intel about Iranian drones. So he now comes out and says, well, he's happy with the cooperation now because he's now supplying Israel with some Iranian drone, which they shut down.
It's exactly correct. no matter what they say, the intelligence cooperation is there.
Yeah, they
Look,
killed 10
it's the deep
Iranian.
state. It's like the deep state. Forget about the State Department and the Pentagon. What is the NSA, the DIA, and the CIA doing? It's what
Yeah,
the deep state does that really matters. It's
that's
like
right.
anything else. Don't worry about the Treasury Department or the Commerce Department. It's what the Fed does.
Very true. And sometimes that's very hard to find out until
That's right.
afterwards what they're
That's
doing.
right.
Now, Jacob, you mentioned that relationship between Bibi and Putin. Russia has warned Israel if they get involved and supply weapons into Ukraine, it'll destroy the Russian relationship, and basically Israel will be basically looked upon as an enemy. These are some dire words. Of course, I think that's going to happen. I think the relationship would be destroyed anyway, regardless. Are we looking down the barrel of a Ezekiel 38, 39 scenario?
Again, we
If
always
we,
speculate about that, and it's easy to
yeah,
see without going into deep conjecture how that could materialize. But again, no matter what Mr. Netanyahu tries to say about keeping a negotiating stance, an ongoing dialogue with Mr. Putin, Russia is too closely in bed with Iran for
right.
Israel to buddy up to Russia beyond the limited point.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about Iran real quick. They're becoming a drone, we would say a drone limited regional superpower. I mean, when it comes to drone technology in the Middle East, excluding Israel, Iran is becoming pretty powerful. They're in trouble economically. They have trouble at home after the death of Masa Amini by the morality police there, the goons that killed her for not wearing her hijab properly. Protests are still going since September 16th. Shopkeepers have stepped up. They're basically massive resistance against the government. They kill hundreds already. And crazy enough, they're importing Hezbollah into Iran from Lebanon to quelch down the protests, crack down on it. But they're committed to selling drones and sending short-range missiles to Russia for the Ukraine war in exchange for a continual, of course, relationship with Iran. Iran's in trouble, but that could be a desperate thing. What do you think?
You hit the nail on the head. Just look at something. It is a national humiliation for Russia to be obtaining any kind of military technology from Iran. Iran used to be their client. Okay. Iran bought the S-300s and the S-400s that have been shown not to work very well in the Ukraine from Russia. Now Russia is buying drones from Iran. Okay. That is a humiliation for Russia in and of itself. But the fact that Russia has to go outside of Russia to get the hardware, but now Iran is having to go to its clients in Lebanon and to bring Hezbollah from Nasrallah's people into Iran to reinforce the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. That shows you the instability taking place in these countries. Iran must go to one of its clients. Russia must go to one of its customers. That is never a good sign. I remember when that happened in the 1960s, when during the Vietnam War, there was such a shortage of Phantom 4 jets. Phantom was a night fighter at the time. That the American government was going to the shore of Iran and buying Phantoms back from Iran that the United States sold to Iran. The United States was buying them back from Iran. This has happened even with the United States. It is a bad sign. It is foreboding. It is not a good sign when Iran must go to Hezbollah or when Russia must go to Iran. It is never a good sign when your customers, your clients, become your suppliers. It's not a good
thing. Now, Iran has sworn to unleash what they call the Ring of Fire. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shiite militia in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen. They're armed to the teeth, of course, no doubt. Missiles, rockets, and of course, kamikaze drones, which are absolutely crazy. They just simply like a kamikaze plane. They just go right into a facility or an electrical facility, and they basically detonate it at the target. Very lethal. But Israel has done something interesting. They have attacked a drone factory in Syria this week, a couple of days
Yes.
ago, in Syria, near Damascus, actually Damascus airport, which was running by Hezbollah. Hezbollah was running those drone factories there and shipping them over to well, they were basically taking care of them and shipping them back to Lebanon.
Yes.
This is the I think they're called the 4400 unit,
Yeah.
one of the most prestigious Hezbollah units. So did Israel hit the targets? I mean, Syria is saying they shut them all down. Israel's saying, no, we got the factory. What do you think, Jacob? A lot of times they lie about this.
Israelis at least got the key ones, and to prevent the rest from being destroyed, the Syrians probably shut them down. That would be an educated guess, but the Israelis definitely made some kills. The question is Iran. Biden is, of course, pursuing the Obama policy of licking the boots of the Iranians, of kneeling down and licking their boots the way Barack Obama did. That is his policy. That's the policy of John Kerry, of Hillary Clinton, of Barack Obama, now continued by Joe Obama, by Biden. But there's a problem. Because drones are being supplied now by Iran to Russia, this is beginning to affect Biden's willingness, or not his willingness, his capacity to make further concessions to Iran because of the Iranians supplying the drones to Russia.
Yeah.
They have to do it. They need the foreign exchange. Where are they going to get the money? Because now the strikes in Iran are beginning to affect oil production on top of the embargoes. You get money where you can. Russia, the same. The Russian mir, it's called mir, means peace in Russia, in Russian. The Russian equivalent of a Visa card. Almost nobody will take it now outside of Russia. They're desperate. You got to get the money someplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money. That should be the name of the show. Follow the money today. Jacob Herzog was at the White House. They were discussing the Lebanon maritime, basically borders with Lebanon and Israel. They finally got to a concession. They finally agreed to it. Lebanon begins to now work with Syria on their borders. Explain to me a little bit. Is this favorable to Israel? Is this damaging to Israel? How do we see it from that perspective? You got Lebanon and Syria working together, repatriating some Syrian refugees as well, and Israel's stuck in the middle.
Okay, first of all, we have to understand Joe Obama wants to placate Iran. Hezbollah controls a major part of Lebanon. Obama, Biden were no friends of Israel. They will blame the victim. The Biden administration will blame the victim. The Biden administration will pressure Israel to get the concessions they want, even though it's to Israel's detriment and to the advancement of the interests of radical Islam. They don't care. Biden has no. He's like Obama. He's a man with no scruples. Like Bush with the House of Saud. He's a man with no scruples whatsoever. Okay, and no national loyalties really, if you look at what they do. Okay, but what's interesting is that it's President Herzog. He's a chief of state. It's not a political office in Israel. It's the equivalent of the British monarch. It is a symbolic office. It is an honored position, but it's not a government position. It's not something that is part of a parliament, of the Knesset. It's not something part of the cabinet. Why are they taking a chief of state? Why is a chief of state for the first time in Israel's history involved in political negotiation with the United States? This is important. And it's not being reported by the mainstream media, of course, but it's not being reported in Israel beyond the limited point. Why is this important? It shows that the United States understands at least that there is no clear political government in Israel. That it's the transitional government that exists now is purely a caretaker. It's a caretaker government that cannot make any long-term or committed decisions on behalf of the nation. In other words, there's nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the Israeli government you can really talk to whose position is not precarious. So who do we talk to? Well, we'll talk to somebody who we know at least is going to be there.
Yeah.
How do I describe this? Well, Thailand is an example. You had the riots and wars between the blue shirts and the red shirts in Thailand, and all this political upheaval and so on. Who did the people look to? Well, they looked to the king.
Yep.
They looked to the chief of state. He gave a perceived stability, even though he was not a figure of government. People looked to him in lieu of the government. When Mussolini fell from power, what did people do? They did the same thing. They went to the Italian royalty.
Yeah.
Same thing. Well, now it's happening in Israel. When you see people going to a chief of state, now it's hard for Americans to understand because the United States, the president is also the chief of state. You've got office in America. In parliamentary democracies, you have two. It's just not the way government is constitutionally or legally conducted, but it's how it is being conducted in this instance. Why is President Herzog there? Why not the foreign minister? Well, because there is no foreign minister who has any credibility at the present time.
Oh, what a mess. Oh, what a tangle web.
Not only that, but this kind of instability of not having a fixed government in Israel, that's happening in Britain now. This used to be a phenomena of Italy. It used to be a repeated phenomena of Italy. Now, interestingly, Italy seems to be stabilizing under a new prime minister. Italy seems to be stabilizing, but Britain and Israel are destabilized.
Yeah. It's a turning door for sure. I just want to remind everyone before we finish here, we want to send in your questions on Rumble. We'll take them just a few minutes. So send in your questions. We'll take them here. Jacob, while this is happening, and the final thought here, the Levites practicing for the temple service. You and I watched this video where they're singing by the Wailing Wall, singing for the temple service of Jerusalem. 600 of them perform a rehearsal like the Cohens and the Levites in the Old Testament for the coming of the third temple. All this stuff is happening, and yet the progression, red heifers, temple service, the Levim, they're there. What are your thoughts? Unpack that a little bit, and we're going to be finishing. Take the questions after that.
The Abraham Accord, similarly. Remember, the Antichrist is going to bring a false peace to the Middle East. And that will in some way involve the rebuilding of a tribulational temple. It's all happening. And it's happening faster. Mitochondrial DNA experiments have been going on in Israel among Jews with names like Levi, Siegel, Cohen, Levinsky for more than 25 years now, in their determination to resurrect some kind of a Levitical priesthood and even find the high priest. However, they're going to do that because of Talmudic debate and so forth. There'll be no end to it. But they're moving in that direction, and they have been. They're doing it. And you're going to see Revelation 11, the outer court given to the Gentiles for 3.5 years, but you're going to see a tribulational temple next to it. This is what it's coming to.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that
building a house for Antichrist. They've rejected the Messiah, so they're building a house for a false one.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, Jacob. You can see these ministries, or sometimes just pilgrims, Christian pilgrims, going up there and supporting it, and giving money to it, and helping the building of, let's say they call it the house of the Lord.
Yes,
where all the nations are going to come. What a disaster!
What a disaster.
What
Naive,
a,
undiscerning, biblically ignorant Christians.
yeah, well, you have like John Hagee, who actually writes large checks to rabbis who actually are fully engaged into anti-missionary movements, and he fully supports them,
Yes,
and Christians support him, and then the money goes to
to
it
fight
goes
the
to against
gospel,
missionaries.
to
Yeah,
fight the cause of
oh,
Israel's salvation. That is correct.
yeah. It's enough to drive you insane. It's enough to drive you insane to try to unravel this. I'm glad Jesus is coming and he will unravel all this.
Amen.
Amen. Now, Jacob, we got some questions in. Yep, we got them in. So let's put you on the hot seat for just a few minutes.
Let's go.
We got some questions, and then we'll go backstage, and you got to tell us what you really think. So here's go, Jacob. Although this is a question for a Bible study on the book of Hebrews, this person says he's being burdened by the Spirit to ask this. Could Sosthenes have been the co-author of Hebrews, along with as he was spoken of highly by Paul? Is it more probable that he was the writer of Hebrews since he was the synagogue leader?
Sosthenes is an outside possibility. People have considered all of these figures at various points, but is he a strong possibility? Probably not.
Okay, very nice, very good. Thank you for that. Jacob, with your experience related to the Asian churches and believers, I'd like to know those believers and how they view dealing with things like meditation and yoga. I've heard of American believers who are pro meditation and yoga. I think this is what it means. But how do Asians, and in this case would have been maybe from India or Pakistan, how do they view meditation and yoga?
We have a Moriel affiliated church in the Midlands of England at a place called Wolverhampton. There's a pastor who's a Christian businessman, an Asian, saved out of Hinduism. And he is the pastor. He's also a trustee of Moriel UK. And his family are all ex-Sikhs and ex-Hindus. There are ex-Hindus in his church. Ask him what he thinks of meditation.
Yeah.
Ask
In fact,
him. I recall during the counterfeit revivals from Toronto, Canada, pastors from India, saved out of Hinduism, watching the videos of John Arnott in Toronto, Canada, and Rodney Brown and these people, saying, this is Kundalini Yoga. This is what we were saved out of. Educated, biblically knowledgeable Christians from Hindu and Sikh backgrounds know exactly what it is and why it's wrong. I mean, people like Zach Poonen, okay, people like that know it's wrong. Okay, Tirtson knows it's wrong. But in India, you have another problem. You have simple people, poor people from the low. There's a caste system in India. People from the lower castes are less educated, and some of them get saved. In fact, sometimes fair numbers of them get saved. Praise God. But when they do, they bring that baggage and mentality with them. So the pastor becomes the new Brahmin priest, and they bring Hinduistic ideas with them into the church. To understand this, we have to go to 1 Corinthians, where you have the same problem. You had people coming from the pagan Greek world who were bringing pagan presuppositions of spirituality with them into the church. They were influenced by the false tongues of the Delphic Oracle and other such ideas of baptism on behalf of the dead, and they were bringing these pagan ideas into the church. Well, that happens in India. Among the less educated, people will bring ideas of Hinduism with them into the church. And the lack of scripturally qualified pastors and theologically educated pastors is a big problem. It's a big problem in most of the third world, but it's certainly a problem in India.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, evangelism often is not a problem. What is a problem is discipleship.
Yeah. And we know some people, Jacob, that are involved in helping pastors, conducting pastor seminar, and influencing them more on the biblical teaching and biblical ideas and helping them in that process.
There are people in Moriel more qualified than I am to answer that question. One, of course, would be Pastor Mark Jackson. Go to the Moriel website, avail yourself of Mark Jackson. He directs our missions in India. Also, Tirthsand. So I'm, and of course, our people in India like Pastor Samuel and so forth. I am not the most qualified person in Moriel to answer that question, but the answer I gave you is solidly true. But
yeah, absolutely.
Understand it better than I do.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we were thinking about bringing Tier and Mark at some point to do some of these episodes with us, Jacob. So it will be a pleasure to have them for sure. Jacob, Neom. Oh, sorry, I skipped on. Let's go back to this one. Sorry. Did you hear that our State Department has threatened to end the North Korean regime should they use a nuclear weapon against America or Asia or one of our Asian allies? How might Taiwan factor into this possible conflict? Any thoughts on that, Jacob? I haven't heard that.
There is definitely, in the face of China, a growing strategic cooperation between Japan, Taiwan, and the United States. However, we have to realize that North Korea cannot sneeze without the consent of China. The real power on back of Kim Jong-un is China. He can't do anything without China. He is simply a stooge. He can't do anything outside of North Korea, and he can't even do anything of a nuclear nature inside Korea without China's approval. So where Taiwan and Japan fit in is in part of the overall strategic scenario. No, it's not North Korea. It's China. North Korea will not act out of concert with China's approval.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think you're right. I had no idea about that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we were already threatened North Korea because they've been pretty adamant against Japan, of course.
But this has been going on for some time. It's
yeah, absolutely. Jacob, the city of Neom, which is in Saudi Arabia, has now issued an edict to bring in all talent and skilled workers from all walks of life. Do you see Islam ending with this city? Just very interesting what's being done there.
It is going to cost at least $500 billion without the cost overruns. We have to understand what it is. Saudi Arabia knows that the long-term viability of oil is not assured. Electric vehicles, not so much the green agenda, but other fossil fuel and even nuclear fuel sources to generate electricity for automobiles. That is the general trend. Now, electricity does not come out of the wall. You're going to need fossil fuels, but it's going to be natural gas or possibly coal gasification or even possibly more nuclear. Japan has now reversed its ban on nuclear energy again and is now going into nuclear reactors. Okay, so Saudi Arabia knows this. It needs to have alternatives. Saudi Arabia was stunned by what happened in the Emirates, in Abu Dhabi, and especially in Dubai. They built these super cities and economies based on financial services and commerce and high tech that were not oil dependent. Saudi Arabia always just relied on oil. Now it is beginning to realize the Emirates have done something that Saudi Arabia has not done. They have a economy that is not as much dependent on oil as Saudi Arabia is. They have to do something. That is what undergirds Neom. Now, what is interesting about Neom theologically is it is very much in the biblical land of Dedan, and the most probable location of Mount Sinai is there. The most probable location of Mount Sinai is there. I have no doubt that would be of some spiritual significance. No doubt.
Yeah, especially some of these cities that are mentioned in the Book of Revelation, like
Absolutely.
Babylon. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Jacob, what is the purpose and significance of the train track being constructed to the Temple Mount from the airport?
Already, you have a tram that goes outside of Damascus Gate, walking distance along the street of the chain to the Kotel, to the Wailing Wall and the Temple Mount. It is already there. It is nothing new. However, during riots and times of stone throwing, those trams get attacked repeatedly. Riots take place, shootings have taken place, but there is no high-speed rail line going from Ben Gurion or Lod Airport to the Temple Mount. It's simply the tram line that's always been there. But the tram line does connect the Tachanat Rakevet, the rail station, to Damascus Gate. So it's already there. Don't believe what you say has an element of truth in it, but it's not true in the way you explain it or ask it. The tracks are already there and have been for some time.
Okay, absolutely. Jacob, last one. What is the timing between the red heifers and the building of the temple? Since the red heifers need to be 2 years old, 2 years and a day old before they can be used.
The rabbis are going to dispute about this and dispute about this and dispute about this. Some of them say you cannot have any more than 3 non-red hairs. If you have more than 3 white hairs, it is unsuitable for the sacrifice needed for the purification of the instrumentation, the sacrificial instrumentation. That's what you need it for. We have a teaching on the red heifer that we did several years ago, on the Morio website. I explained the purposes of it to some degree, but these red heifers have been bred in Alabama, in Texas, and in Israel for some time. I don't think they're going to have a hard time getting the red heifer when they need one. The timing will not be the issue. The issue will be the politics.
Very true. Very true. Well, these are all the questions we had. Jacob, we're going to get you off the hot seat very quickly. And thank you for that. And for those who are watching on YouTube, for those who are watching on Facebook, we're going to be jumping over to Rumble and RTN. And I forget, I don't know if Jay can tell us if we're going to Vimeo or not, Jay. I don't know if we discussed that. No Vimeo. Okay, so no Vimeo. And so join us on Rumble, join us on Telegram, join us on RTN. For the backstage. If you really want to know what Jacob thinks, he just gave you a little hors d'oeuvre. He just gave you a little appetizer. The real meal's in the back. The real meal's in the back. And we're going to be talking about China. We're going to be talking about what we cannot talk about on YouTube and places like that. Things about medical procedures and things like that. We're going to be talking about election and what Hillary's saying about the election. So join us there. Maybe some cyborg talk. Join us there backstage. We'll be signing off. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube and Facebook. Jump over to Rumble and RTN and Telegram and see Jacob backstage with his hair down.